Hey, it's me. Back at the start of an episode once again, telling you what's happened. So what happened this week wasn't actually that bad. I just kind of forgot to give any context at the start of the show. Max isn't here. He's playing hockey or something. So no Max, but we got an even equally as exciting guest instead. We've got Megasett joining us this week. So very good episode. Hope you enjoy. Without further ado, here it is. It's episode 38 of the PoddyC. Joining us this week is one of the few holders I've learned from a Reddit post recently of a title on the same character every single season that the title has been out, the M Plus title. It's Megasett. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
That was a cool post. I don't know if you saw it. There's like 40 people or something in the world that have gotten title on the same character every season, and your monk is one of them.
Yeah, it was cool to see like familiar names on there. I'm glad that people have stuck with whatever they want, even if it wasn't the best.
Yeah, and then also a bunch of mages too.
Yeah, forget those guys. But
yeah.
Oh, was it dominated by mages?
I don't remember actually. I think there were only a couple. Yeah.
There's quite a few mages and quite a few warriors actually.
Yeah, I saw the warriors actually. That was surprising to me, because like, there's been a lot of seasons where warriors not had an especially good time of it, right? Like.
Yeah, the last time that they were good, from what I remember, was like BFA, and that was before title.
But you've done it on Mistweaver, right? Every single season.
Mistweaver, yeah. And the other monk on there was also Mistweaver, and both shamans were also healers, so I think we kind of lucked out with that.
Yeah, I do feel like warrior is consistently a good DPS, even though it might not be meta most of the time.
Yeah, I think doing it like as prot every season would have been kind of tough, but DPS warrior definitely. Because yeah, I haven't gotten every title, but the ones that I have, I've never done it on the same character twice. I've done it on like 4 different characters now, which is a pretty different playstyle for sure than just doing it on like making it work every season. I guess the last couple seasons have got to be really good, right? Because Mistweaver had the like mid Dragonflight resurgence of dev attention.
Weird. It was nice. I'm kind of missing it though, because we've gotten a couple nerfs with things that have been historically bad. They were finally good for once, and now they're bad again, and I don't want to go back to that.
That's sad.
Like,
yeah, I saw
that's what's happening.
There was the like 13% nerf going into season 4. Are you talking about like beta stuff though? Or are they making abilities that were fun and good back into like not good?
Yeah, Life Cocoon is back. Like for Dragonflight, for like half of it, we could use Life Cocoon on tanks, and that was our only button for tanks outside of just healing them. But that is no longer going to be a thing because they nerfed it because of our scaling health pools, and it scales off of our health and verse. So they knocked it down quite a bit, and it feels pretty bad on tanks again.
Yeah, dude, I always thought that was weird that scaled off of your health rather than the tank's, like the target's health.
Yes, it should be the target. Thank you. Like instead of it going from bad to good to bad based on how they want to tune it, it should just be the target's health so that it's not insane on DPS or on healers, but it still works for tanks. I don't know why they haven't done that or thought of that, or maybe they just don't care. I don't know.
Yeah. Speaking of beta and stuff, the other beta changes have been like tank durability changes, which obviously is not specifically a healer thing, but you kind of have to deal with it as the healer, right? Is like how much you have to focus and pay attention on your tanks and how many globals you're having to dump into them. I know me and Dorki were both... I actually was really doomer about that post when I first read it, which it was weird because the changes themselves weren't actually as bad as I thought they would be, but the reasoning behind them really scared me. How has it been for you, like if you've healed any keys since those like healing tanks in this post nerf world?
I might get like kind of a different take than other healers. I haven't been keeping up with other healers so much outside of just are they good, are they bad? But Mistweaver has a lot of passive healing that happens as we DPS, so a lot of that gets eaten up by the tank. Or I have like AoE healing that needs an anchor, like Shaylin's Gift is our big one. There's a target, but it still heals everybody else, so I'll usually just use that on the tank. So not a whole lot has changed for Mistweaver specifically, because they do just kind of soak up all the overhealing or what would be overhealing. But I think that that's maybe a unique experience because of how Monk heals. I do worry about not having a button for them and having like Ring of Peace be the best defensive I have for my tank again. I'm not looking forward to that, especially because things, like anything higher than our level will just walk through it. Like any lieutenant mob just walks through it. So a little scared about that. But I
Yep.
think overall it's way better than I expected it to be after reading the notes.
It feels like every pull has a lieutenant mob in it as well. Like even the
Yeah.
mist maze now, there's all the defenders have been promoted to lieutenant, right? And they're just walking through everything.
Like every dungeon that we've received that has been a previous season, with the exception of Underrot, they've all been worse than the first time that we saw them.
Really? You think so? I
Yeah,
feel like some
even
of them have been
Waycrest.
improved. Wait, yeah, Waycrest for sure. That one sucked real bad. But I do feel like some of them were improvements. Like
I think
personally,
Halls
I
of
felt
Valor.
like Halls of Valor. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
gonna say the exact same
Oh,
thing.
that's
Halls
true.
of Valor
I didn't
was
play
a
Halls
big
of I
improvement.
didn't play Legion.
Okay.
I didn't get
I
to
also think
experience
the
that the first
Cataclysm
time.
That's fair.
dungeons, but I think that's not really fair to compare the at least Vortex.
Yeah.
Wait, no, not Vortex
Yeah.
Pinnacle. Throne of the Tides. Throne of the Tides, I think was better than the Cata version, but Vortex Pinnacle, I guess, was equally as bad. And Grim Batol,
Well,
I don't know.
I recently learned that in Classic or in Season of Discovery or something, you can mount in Vortex Pinnacle, but we can't on retail.
I
didn't know
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't
That's
understand
tough.
that change.
that was weird.
Oh yeah, that's brutal. Dude, Vortex Pinnacle was such a blunder. That was always such a
That was a
downer when
key.
your key would turn into that, and it was also the one that was like the lowest level that season. So it was like it had that like King's Rest feel where you get it and it's like, oh man, -2 key levels.
I thought Everbloom was enjoyable too. I know a lot of people hate Everbloom. I don't remember if you liked it or not, Meg. I remember doing a lot of Everblooms with you when I was playing my Boomy, and I enjoyed that dungeon.
I liked it much more on Fortified, partially because I don't like 7-minute boss fights.
You know,
I just wish that it felt a little bit more balanced, like throughout the key. The first half felt super easy, and then as soon as you got to the mage, it was like, okay, now the key starts, but you're still, you're 20 minutes in already. I don't really like when dungeons do that, but it wasn't my least favorite.
Yeah, I didn't like the combination it had with like bolstering Sanguine, right? Like it was a really nasty on death affix dungeon. I wonder if it would have been a lot better like now that there's the new affixes, the low B affixes. Speaking of which, what are your thoughts on the affix change going into War Within, like the pruning and then the low keys and the high keys having different rules and stuff?
I think they're trying to make it better between like high key pushers, people that are tired of doing homework keys or waiting a couple months or whatever for push weeks. And I appreciate that. I'm slightly worried about it becoming a little stale, but I'm also happy because I don't have to worry like, oh, I'm gone this week. What if that's a good week? My group's gonna have to find a different healer, or the weird scheduling thing when it comes to static groups. I think it'll open up people to play more openly with everyone because you're not tied to your group for the week. You can just kind of play whenever you feel like playing, which is nice. But I do worry about like people trying to pug. I feel like that level 12 area, it just scales so hard. I'm nervous for that. I think for people that aren't quite in like static groups or anything, if they're trying to form a group, they're trying to get into pushing, but they're still kind of in that limbo of half LFG and half not.
Yeah, I agree. Like there's like a chasm between 11 and 12 that
Yeah.
because it's that big, maybe there are some people who like would climb it if it was more gradual, right? But just never really get a good chance to.
Yeah, and I am glad that they took away that massive climb that you would have to do from 2 to 24 or whatever it would end up being for you. I think that that's nice because it kind of respects your time a little bit more, but the jumps are much more extreme.
that's a good point. I haven't thought about the whole to the hierarchies, and yeah, I mean, now that we've gone to test beta with 626 gear, which is Myth Track 2, I believe, gear.
That sounds right. Yeah.
We got to see like we get to see a better perspective of what the keys are going to end up looking like, and it's looking like the keys are not going to go very high. Like I'm going to predict a 16 or 17 being the highest keys, and that means we're looking at from 12 to 16 being like roughly the push keys. So there isn't really going to be much of a discrepancy, which has me worried as well. I have a feeling it's just going to be all right. People get to 12 keys, and then they're going to do the 12 eventually, and it's going to be like, all right, so are we going to even be able to do the 13 or the 14? And if you get to that point, does it just become an insurmountable wall, which kind of like removes some level of progression? Because I mean, realistically, you're only progressing like what, 4 key levels?
Yeah, you
But
get
I
this
guess,
spot where it's like there's like a 2 chest key level, and then 1 level up, it's like
yeah,
really,
Yeah.
really hard, right?
And it seems
I
like
guess it's
with
nice
the
with the tens.
change, it seems like with the change, they kind of like with the affixes going away, they wanted keys to be more doable throughout the entire season. So you don't, do your push week and then you're done. It seems like they wanted the biggest keys to be done at the end of the season. But with how the scaling is, we might not even get to that point. We might just hit 13, 14, 15, whatever, and then just be done because the next key level is just not possible.
Yeah, it's tough because like I get why you'd want to have a big gap between the key levels, but I hate it when that happens when it's like you're
Yeah.
4 minutes under at one key level and then you can't do the one above it. It feels like wrong. But I don't know. I feel like that's a problem. You guys see the other change they made to the keys this week where they like cut a bunch of time off of a lot of the timers?
Yeah.
It seems like they really want to, and I like this, like move to depleting on time rather than on like this boss is
One
too
shots.
hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Which I'm actually a fan of. It's weird because obviously like it feels bad if you've been testing them before, right? Like it feels bad to go into a dungeon that had a 38-minute timer and now it has a 35-minute timer, right? But like for people that haven't tested, I think it's just going to be better.
Yeah.
I've
I think that
actually
it
heard.
also, sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say I just heard like really mixed opinions about this because on one hand there are people who are complaining about like, oh man, like pugs are just gonna be awful. It's just gonna be one wipe and it's GG, it's over. Whereas in Dragonflight they were able to come back because you know how like if you were playing Dragonflight you could have had 1 or 2 wipes and you would still be able to time keys. And I'm not sure how you guys feel about that.
I think it's better for people just doing weeklies and just trying to get their vault options. But as a player, it felt really terrible to play a perfect key and have like no deaths and have, 6 minutes left and then see someone else do it and they have like 25 deaths and they still have 3 minutes. You're like, oh, I didn't actually need to play that well, right? We just needed to make it to the last boss is all.
Yeah, that's the
So
worst.
I like depleting to timer much more than I like depleting to ERT defensive note, but I do think that that might be a little bit of a different perspective than someone just doing weeklies.
I'm not even sure if it's like the weekly keyers, honestly. I think it's. I mean, I guess there is that part too. Like, for sure, people who just wanna get their weekly rewards and well, just like rewards in general, whether it's dungeon loot or weekly rewards, they just want to get
Hmm.
in and get out.
Yeah, there is a lot of tension there, right? Like I think that especially it's weird because there's that one key level where the death penalty ramps up, right? I feel like that is going to be a big. There are going to be a lot of players where that level is like a lot less fun, right? Because like now your 20 death runs are penalized by an extra 3 minutes or something, right?
Yeah. I do wish with the death timer change, I do wish that they would just put graveyards after every boss.
Oh yeah, dude. I wish
With
that was
that,
a just like I wish that was just the rule, like the law of the
yeah,
land, right? It was just you kill a boss, you get a graveyard because it feels like such a weird way for dungeons to be gate kept as well, right? Like if you want to get into key pushing, one of the things you have to learn is where all the graveyards are and like
yeah.
what triggers them to update, and then you can make a decision of like should I instantly release or should I stay and not release? And if you make the wrong decision, you're like griefing your group. And
Hmm.
I feel like that's such a unfun way to like test players' skill is testing the skill of knowing the intricacies of all the graveyards.
I feel like the wall to get into key pushing, like title range, is so high, and there's so many things that people just don't know about until they mess it up or someone else messes it up. Like if like a mistake has to be made, and you do learn from mistakes, but I feel like there's so many things that it just becomes discouraging, and you're like, nah, never mind, I'm not gonna do this. This isn't. I don't have enough time for this,
Yeah, the like
and that's just one of them.
this is stupid, I'm out of here moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of which, I think the amount of progression needed in these keys will be significantly higher than before. I don't know how much you've been progging keys on beta meg, but I swear it feels like a lot of the keys we enter, it's just trying to figure out how to beat the bosses or get through certain trash packs. And
Yeah.
I'm just like imagining when this goes live, like all the groups that are just gonna get slaughtered when they're out there pugging, which is not necessarily a bad thing, by the way. Like I think it's good that there's some level of progression needed, and it is kind of like a just get good moment. And it is pretty fulfilling and satisfying for groups when they do manage to figure out how to overcome these dungeons, especially for groups that are playing in an organized group and rather than just some pug group. But for the pug scene in particular, there's going to be a lot of progression needed.
Seems like every pack has just so much happening, and every boss has like one too many mechanics.
How do you
Yes.
feel about that, by the way? Like the
The
whole,
bosses or the trash?
I want to say the bosses specifically, because do you feel like it's better for the bosses to be more engaging, or is it a little bit too much right now?
I think it depends on the length of the fight. Like, I would much rather have a crazier, like a busier boss, but have it be shorter rather than a boss that is kind of a punching bag and it's 5 minutes long. I think there could be a balance there between how many bosses are super mentally taxing versus not. Like Everbloom, as an example, you have Yalnu being 7 minutes with really strict defensive use for the one shots on the upheaval or whatever it was called, the stomp. And
Yeah.
you had Archmage, which was a mess in her own ways, but another like really taxing fight from a healer perspective, and DPS as well, because one shots they have to push defensives or they die. But whereas Gnarl Root was like a punching bag, and he was literally inactive, not even meleeing for half of the fight.
Speaking of stuff that's happened on beta, what did you think of the healer affix they put in that was like a heal absorb, and now it's not a heal absorb, it's just
Dude.
a dot that you heal
I
through?
want some dog shit.
I don't understand. They want to nerf healers and they want to take away, our tools because we were topping health bars too quickly, like in Dragonflight, and then they do stuff like that. Like, hello? I don't know. I don't know what they're like. As a healer, I'm like, oh, a fun little job for me to do. Great. But then on top of everything else, like, you're going to have some criminal overlaps. And just, it kind of reminds me of Prideful, where you're playing the affix instead of playing the dungeon because you're just sending cooldowns into the affix every time. And I have mixed feelings on that.
It reminds me of
Bad
Quaking.
ones.
Remember back when
Oh.
Quaking would always do 20% of your health as damage, and you'd look at like damage taken at the end of the dungeon, and number one was
Yeah.
like Quaking by a mile. That's
Dude, the Quaking bursting week with
Oh,
old bursting and old
good
Quaking.
golly. Yeah,
Oh.
if you were playing one of the specs that had to cast a heal as well, right? And you see the Quaking
Sounds
come out
great.
and it's gonna kill you, and you can't stop casting because but you need to because it's gonna interrupt you, and it was fun. It was a good time.
Got like 10 minutes into one freehold in BFA and did not play the rest of that week.
Yeah, that's wise. Yeah, the other affixes have been. I feel like they've been doing a good job of tuning most of the other ones to be like pretty good, but I don't like the dispel pressure on the healer one as well. I feel like that one they should just like nerf it by like 80% more on how much healing you have to do, and then make it not dispellable or something. I don't
Yeah,
know.
and we got rid of like the afflicted. Like the whole problem was the dispel and the comp
Yeah.
restrictions that brought, and we're like, oh, thank God they got rid of it, and then they immediately brought it back. I was like, oh, that's a choice.
Yeah,
All
that
right.
was suspicious.
Yeah,
I wouldn't
it's definitely
mind
a
the
much
healing
dumber
thing though.
version. Which part?
Like if
having to heal it
they,
off.
yeah, if they made it not a dispel and nerfed it by a significant amount.
Yeah,
Well, but
But then you have
it
to
would have to be
limit.
like a certain number, right? Because like if it's too easy, then it's kind of whatever. But if it's too hard, then you run into those situations where it's like, all right, this affix happens during a heavy AoE damage moment, and that's what I've noticed with these affixes, by the way. Whenever there's like mechanics happening, it fucks with the affix really badly. Like the one where you have to soak the orbs, right? Like generally, the soaking the orb one
Oh
is
yeah.
super easy until suddenly there's like crazy amounts of area denial and there's like puddles all over the place, and you just can't soak the orbs. Then it becomes like the most catastrophic affix.
That
yeah.
was kind of the issue with storming too. Like storming isn't a problem until it is and you're dead, and that was it. Like it was completely manageable until you added like one or two things onto it.
Yeah, I feel like
Yeah.
that's kind of true with any HPS requiring affix. Is like even if it only requires a tiny amount of HPS, if you're ever doing a fight that is really really heavy on how much HPS you need, right? Like that's gonna push. That's gonna be the straw that breaks the camel's back. But on the other hand, it doesn't exist in keys above 12, right? So like it
That's a good
kind
point.
of
Yep.
won't happen if it because if it did, right, like that was always the problem with like quaking, right, was it would just knock a couple key levels off the highest you could do because it would happen on a boss like Galvazed in Temple of Sithralis or whatever, and you just like, okay, I can't do this, right? But these affixes are like by definition they're never going to be in those key levels where it's like mathematically happening like that. It's just going to be if you're in a group that is, you know, having difficulty in a +7, it's going to happen to you there, right? But like that's it's like it's not going to be the same kind of high key numbers impossible challenge thing.
I wonder if we're going to be at a point where a 13 is easier than a 12 because you have one key level higher, but you don't have to deal with those affixes, even though the scaling is so insane. It's kind of like that weird point where healing becomes easier in high keys because if you take extra damage, you just die and don't have to heal it.
Yeah, or do you remember Upper Mechagon in Awakened season? If you went from the 9 to the 10, you got the obelisks, and so you could skip the gauntlet. And if you're playing with certain types of players, that was a really important thing to have.
Yep. That was an interesting one. I miss
Yeah.
Awakened, though. That was a good one.
That was a good affix. The Awakened is one of those things that makes me sad that seasonals are kind of gone, although it does seem like these +2s, I don't know, they're not really seasonals, right? Like because they're Xalatath themed, right? I bet they last the whole expansion, but change in the next one, something like that.
Expansionals.
Expansionals, yeah. But it's like they don't have they don't like change how you're going to do the dungeon, which was my favorite part of seasonals, right? It was
Yeah.
like there's a cool new thing you can do because you've got a woe speed buff here.
Yeah, like the good seasonals were really good, but then the bad ones just made you not want to play.
Yeah, that's fair.
There's gotta
It's
be a
definitely
middle
like
ground.
a grass is always greener type thing looking back.
The emissaries.
Yeah.
I think that they could bring some of the good ones. It wouldn't really work now with the new affix system, but I was thinking that they could maybe bring some of the good ones back. Like, I would love to have Reaping as a weekly. It wouldn't be good for the timer, but it is fun. It's a fun one. Cryptic was good, or Encrypted. Awakened was good. I don't know if they had them in Legion. But
No.
nah, any of the good ones could have been, I feel like, weeklies, but now we don't have weeklies at all, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you brought up the whole like you're afraid it might get boring quick, that's a common complaint or concern for a lot of high level players actually. I've talked with a lot of players around this keep pushing range, and that is a common consensus. But I do think you have the most level headed take when it comes to that whole like, oh, it's gonna probably suck for the couple of us who play all day every day, but it'll be great for the people who just like want to push with whoever and whenever. However, I'm just wondering, like, is there a way they can add replay value to these dungeons? Because that is definitely a concern when we're talking about these seasonals. Like, what made Awakened so great was it added so much replay value to these dungeons that we played for 2 years straight. Like when we're looking at Dragonflight dungeons, we only play these for one season at a time, but back in BFA, we legit played these dungeons for
Yeah.
the entire expansion, but we loved every part of it.
Well,
Okay, not every part of it, but
looking back on
loved-
it, we loved every part of
Okay,
it,
okay,
you know, in
yeah.
our memories, right?
Yeah,
But
maybe
at the
that's a little
time,
bit too far
I
back.
remember complaining at the time as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was only like the complaints, like, early on and when they were.
Oh, what do you
not
mean? There was
polished.
King's Rest, Siege of Paralysis, Toldagor, all expansion.
Dude, I legit didn't mind them when it was Awakened.
Yeah,
When it
that's
was
fair.
it
Awakened
was a good
did
time.
fix a lot of the. Awakened made like a tall worse, and that dungeon was like good otherwise. But
Yeah,
yeah,
the slime was in a weird spot. He was
Yeah.
like up by Volcall in a corner.
yeah, it was icky.
I need to do both sides.
Yeah. It was like the one place where you got less options with Awakened than rather than more. But yeah, okay. Sorry, I cut you off, Dorki. You were talking about how we loved BFA for 2 years and the dungeons there.
Hey, okay, maybe after 2 years, but definitely the last season, that was a banger.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, so I have this talk with like healers all the time, and I feel like healers are generally they all have differing opinions, right? Like there's the ones who would prefer if it was just non-stop healing the entire time for the entire dungeon for the most part, or just like like it's healing intensive, like Ruby life pools.
Hmm.
And then there are
Yeah.
dungeons where you don't really do as much healing. It's just like occasional healing, but you're like mostly focused on damage and doing all other things like CCing, which would be like Azure Vault. And then there are dungeons that are like a mix, right? Where it's like there's some crazy stuff and there's a break, and then there's some crazy stuff and there's a break. Maybe like Nelfaris. Like which ones would do you prefer, or where would you put yourself, Meg?
It's a little, again, for Mistweaver, it's a little different because I do have to DPS anyway, but I get very bored when I'm only DPSing. And I don't want to say early Ruby life pools because it was rough, but like mid season 1 Ruby life pools, I think was perfect. I think it was the perfect dungeon in terms of healing. You had the last boss that had the issue of it being, a little crazy with the Inferno cores, but like the ring area and the first trash area, I felt like I was influential in the key, and that doesn't happen a whole lot as a healer in a lot of these dungeons at a higher level, because then it's just push your defensives or die. So I think that the healing requirement in Ruby was spot on, like mid to late season 1. But I also think it depends on the healer that you play, because there are some healers that are designed just to constantly heal all of the time, and there's other healers that are maybe more cooldown to cooldown or are burstier.
That's actually a really good point. Yeah, because like when I play Resto Druid, I sometimes don't like it when I have to like prep 50,000 globals and then it's like, all
Mhm.
right, there's this one damage event and then back to going into cat and then I have to prep another 50,000 globals. It definitely gets really exhausting. Whereas like I'm just imagining Mistweaver. Yeah, like
Just
you said, you are
constantly
doing damage.
upkeep.
Yeah, yeah.
But then, you have to look at the other side where it's like people that just want to do damage. Do you really want to play a healer? If all you want to do is damage, are you sure that healing is
That's a good
what you
point.
want to be spec'd into?
Would you prefer if they didn't have damage? Because that's like something that a lot of
No, I
more
hate that.
old school yeah, that is a
Yeah.
old school healer take, and I understand the whole like idea behind it because some healers don't want to have that pressure of like you're constantly having to hit globals every moment of the dungeon where like you just want to like all right there's like times where you heal and then times where you just don't really do much and then times where you heal.
I think my issue with, like, back in Shadowlands, there was not a whole lot of heal checks and healer damage was very much a make or break for a lot of the keys. And Mistweaver was the lowest damage by a mile and a half. Like, we did like 3K. Other healers were doing like 30 plus or something. It was very low. But I was still doing it, right? I wasn't doing much. I did very little of the group's damage, but I was participating. And I think that's what it comes down to ultimately. It's like there isn't healing to do all the time. So when there isn't, what are you doing? You're just standing there? Like there's not something to do all the time except for damage. That's always an option. So I think for me it's less of a like, oh, my damage is impactful, because sometimes it's not, but I'm still part of the group. I'm still participating in the poll in the dungeon.
Yeah, I know there are some healers that just want to like I just want to heal. I don't want to be on the damage meters at all, right? Like I just I'm a healer. I'm here to heal, but I agree with
Yeah.
you that like if you make that what healing is, then you just can't have like, oh, I'm a good healer. I healed in 3 globals instead of 4, so I get 1 damage global, and like that's how I show I'm a good healer, right? Like you'd have to just make the only way that you could make healing hard then would be like, oh, I'm a good healer. My group lived, and the bad healers group died, and
Yeah.
that's a lot nastier.
And I don't think that the game is really in a spot like we have the trifecta of tank healer DPS, and now we have support, but
Yeah, Og.
I feel like it is
That was
such
yeah.
a like an outdated kind of trope. I mean it's a classic, but it's also like pure healers I don't really feel like have a place anymore. Kind of similar to how tank healers don't really exist anymore, like in raid.
Mhm.
They'll get beacon, but you don't have someone just sitting there turret healing into your tank. So I feel like it's just kind of an outdated practice, and that's maybe what classic is for. But
I mean, even
I
in
know a lot
classic
of people aren't gonna
nowadays, you
like
don't
that.
do that. Yeah, I feel that way too. Because I mean, I get it though. Because I do know like a lot of people who signed up for healer back in the day, they wanted more of like a lax role, something where it's like, all right, you're healing, but outside of healing, like you don't want to just have to do all of these other tasks. So I can definitely see it, but I also agree, like I just don't really see WoW being that type of game anymore.
Yeah, it's definitely evolved, especially from like when I was a kid. It has changed a lot, and I used to be that, that person. Like when I picked up Monk for the first time, before I had done anything competitive, I like didn't even know what Mystic Touch was. Didn't know that I need to hit the mobs. Like, there's definitely a point where you just don't know better and you haven't learned yet, versus actively choosing to not do those things. And I think that that's kind of the decision that you make there is deterministic.
Yeah. Okay, speaking of Mistweaver, we'll pivot a little bit to kind of more of a story time, I guess, section, because I've always been curious, like, how did you land on Mistweaver as your, class and spec? Have you been playing that forever, or how did you decide on it?
I was actually, so growing up, I started playing when I was 8. I'm 24 now. And for the longest time, I actually played Resto Druid, which is hilarious because I won't touch it with a 10-foot pole now. But I could turn into a cat, and that was really cool to 8-year-old me. So that's what I played for the
So
longest
why do you
time.
not like Resto Druid now?
I feel like I push a lot of buttons and not a lot of things happen. A lot of globals.
That's not
That
the
is
reason
true.
I was expecting was like, oh, Restager has been the meta healer for so long, and I hate it now as an off meta healer.
That is part of it. When I started streaming in BFA, like before Monk had its season 4 shenanigans, its 2 weeks of fame, I would have a lot of people come into my chat, be like, "Why aren't you playing Resto Druid? It's so much better." But I was doing like 20s, like like I was doing not even title keys, whatever that would have been. I was like, what were people even doing in BFA? Like 28, 30?
At the end of it,
32s?
Dependent
Yeah.
line, yeah.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm not doing keys where this matters. I'm just playing with my friends. I don't have CE. Like, it's it's not that serious. Leave me alone. But I had so many people asking, so it got annoying after a while. And that is part of it, but that has kind of subsided now.
Yeah, that's so you
yeah.
just were you just like trying out a bunch of different healers and you started playing Mistweaver and it like clicked?
Yeah, I played Mage, Fire Mage, and Legion.
Wow, the early Jang B arc,
yeah,
the prototype.
I did a whopping like depleted 11 Arquay, I think was my highest in Legion, and that was like postseason maybe. So very early. I had a Druid, I had a Monk, and I had them all leveled. I got through the MSQ on my Mage and just kind of stopped playing it for some reason. Picked up my Monk and then started playing with friends and like, oh, you should stream because I want to watch you play and there's not really any monks. And I was like, okay, why not? And then that just ended up sticking with it because it wasn't, looking back on it, it is not nearly as fun as it is now, but it was fun at the time because I had been playing other things for so long. And it was pretty. Monk has some really pretty spells, and I cared about that before I did anything competitive at all, so...
That's cool. Yeah, I remember the Reddit post I referenced at the start of this video or podcast with the like different people, the people that have had title on the same character every season, and one of the comments was like, "Wow, Mystic, we're just so lucky to have Megaset," right? Which is like that's a really cool thing to be true about.
So happy,
right? Like, yeah, it's that's gotta be a nice feeling because like I don't know, I'm sure looking back at when you started now, it's like I've come a long way in my understanding of the spec, right? And now I can like help shepherd other novice Mistweavers into the understanding what the hell they're doing on the spec.
I hope a lot of the times I'm doing it justice. Like I get worried about not knowing it as intimately as others, like specifically with theory crafting. Like math has never been my thing, so I just let the people that are good at it do it. But I do worry sometimes where I'm like, oh, I could contribute so much more if I just learned how to do the theory crafting side of things. But I don't know if that's in the cards for me.
Yeah, I don't.
There's a lot.
Especially
I don't even know
as
where
a healer.
Start.
Like the healing side is so much more. I don't know, like DPS, right? Like DPS, you can kind of compare, like, oh, this build does this much DPS, this build does this much DPS, right? Like,
yeah.
But for healing, it's I don't know. Like I do.
I do wish there was real
Yeah.
simming for healing, but it's kind of impossible to do.
Yeah, it's because it's like, I mean, every fight has a different damage profile, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's cool
It's
though.
also complicated because like there's so much more to it than just healing too. Because like sometimes you're thinking like, all right, maybe I want to spec for more damage, or maybe I need to like pick up some utility options. There's always that like back and forth between how you want to build your character as a healer and as a tank too. Like that's been a common problem with tank, and it's like you said, Dranos. With DPS, it's figured out, right? It's all right. This does more damage, therefore this is better. But with healing and tanking, there's just like so much more factors, and that's why it's always been hard. I mean, I feel the same way as you too, Meg, when you were talking about how like you don't want to give off not exactly the right information to
Yeah, I don't want to
like
misinform
whoever may be
people.
out there. Yeah,
Yeah.
and but like it's also like more complicated than that because sometimes certain things might not be applicable to your average player. Like your average player might not be utilizing certain things well enough. Like I don't know if there's a good example of this, but like maybe there's like a certain talent that you have to actively use. Like if you have to press it every 30 seconds in order for it to be actually good. And there's like a chance that like someone who's not that good at the game is like pressing it once every minute or 2 minutes. Like those guys are probably better off with like the more passive talents.
Hmm.
That's why like it's a little
Yeah.
bit hard to weigh in your thoughts or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I have there's the Mistweaver conversation of can I play ranged? Can I do this? No, you're melee. You're coded that way. You get melee mechanics. That's
No.
like always my
Oh, the
answer.
caster build. Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
all of
you
your
sometimes
damage.
get the range mechanics. Yours over Sylvanas, where you just
Yeah.
got both.
Oh, yeah,
That's
I
a good
remember
time.
that.
Yeah.
That one was cool. Just get everything. But like my answer as a competitive player is no, that's not the best that you can do, numerically healing wise, numerically damage wise, all of your utility, with the exception of one thing, is melee. You have your kick, all of your damage. Like we're melee. It's just how it is. But if you are so I don't want to say this way, but if you're so bad at being in melee that you just keep dying or that you're not able to heal and focus on being in melee at the same time, then maybe a ranged I don't want to say ranged, but a caster build is better. But at that point, a different spec would just be better instead. But there's always going to be the growing pain. So it's like we do get a lot of flack for that where it's like, I want to play ranged, go play Holy Priest, But it's not like a shady answer or meant to be rude, but it's a legitimate suggestion of like this will probably serve you better in the long run. And then
That
when,
does
when you want to
actually
be
suck.
comfortable, then come back into it. But
Yeah, I know Holy Paladins have this too, right? Like the whole caster Holy Paladin build versus like melee build. And like you always end up playing melee anyways. I I do kind of wish there was that alternative. Because I mean, I get it too, right? Because like think about it from the person's perspective where they want to be a monk and but they don't want to be in melee. And it just
we get
feels
a lot
bad
of
if it's
that.
like, all right, just go play Resto Shaman instead. It's like, well, I mean, I guess I could play Resto Shaman, but like I just don't like the idea of like being a Resto
Yeah.
Shaman. So I do wish Blizzard actually looked into that more and gave better options, even if it's not
Well,
optimal.
I feel like I don't know if this is like a monk specific thing, but Mistweaver played specifically in Dragonflight. We played one build in Keys, a different build in Raid that played completely different, and then you have PvP where you have actual ranged Mistweavers and Fistweavers is what they're calling it, right? So you've got like 4 different ways to play this in 4 different types of content, and they are all legitimate because you had the Jadefire Stomp and Rising Mist stuff in Keys, where you're definitely in melee. That is the best way to play. But then you had, like during Emir Drasil, monks weren't really in melee at all because all of our healing spells that we needed were just casted abilities, and we didn't take Rising Mist, so we didn't need to be in melee. We would still get melee mechanics, but because it's raid, we're excluded because we're a healer, right? So there's all these like little exceptions that make things work. And then you have the confusion where you're like, I really like Mistweaver and Raid. Can I do the same keys? Not really. And then you have PvPers like, oh, I want to play Castweaver in keys because I need to do it for appearances or whatever. And we're over here like, Kind of. But you have all of these different playstyles that are legitimate in different forms of content, and they don't really transfer well. So the conversation is split us like priest, where you have holy and discipline, split us Mistweaver, Fistweaver, or whatever you want to call it. But my issue with that is that one of them is always going to be better. Like you
Well,
look
but
at
so you say it's better, but like, what if it's like only, like at what percent margin would you say where it's not as impactful? Because I know there's always like there's going to be a better one, but
uh,
like, what if it's only like 5% better? Like, is that still fine?
right now, for what we're looking at in War Within, between the Rising Mist build and the Tear of Morning build, it's about 5%. So you can do either. It was a much bigger gap in Dragonflight, but they did nerf a bunch of stuff and got rid of some talents that made that work. So you can do either as it stands right now for the War Within for Raid. But for keys, it's timed content and all of your damage is still melee, and most of your utility is also still melee, plus melee mechanics that you're not excluded from because you're a healer and all of those fun things. So if it's within like 5%, that's fine. You probably won't see it in the world first because they're always going to play whatever's the best, regardless. But I do worry about looking at. I was back in like season 1 before Mistweaver was good. I was going to do a video about what is wrong with Mistweaver, what's the problem, why does no one play it? And I went back in logs all the way back to Throne of Thunder from Mop, and every representation that I looked at, you had Mistweaver at the bottom, but if Mistweaver wasn't at the bottom, it was the other healer spec, or the other priest spec that wasn't the highest
Right.
representation, right? So it was always Disc at the bottom or always Holy at the bottom, and the other one was better, so they never got brought. And that's what I would worry would happen with Mistweaver or Fistweaver. Like, this is gonna sound bad, but I don't trust them enough to split Mistweaver into 2 specs because they just got it right with one. If that makes sense. Like just now we're in a good spot with one version of Mistweaver. And I worry that if they split it, it would just become completely just off balance again.
I can see
Yeah,
that.
I think that's a fairly common like structure of thought that people have about their spec is like, yeah, I'd like them to do this, but I don't trust them to. Like historically looking at this, so I'm happy with what we've got right now. Like, please don't look at me anymore. It's fine. It's all good.
Yeah. And I'm happy because my playstyle is dominant, right? I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
this is great. Don't change it. But there are the people that don't want that. And I've had, many conversations about it, and my stance isn't going to change. But there is that other portion of the community that wants it a certain way, that has had it that way in the past. So there's, the principles or the precedent is set. So it is an option, but there's that issue of trusting them to do it correctly. It would benefit both because it would free up more stuff in our tree. Like the left side of Mistweaver's spec tree is criminal. Like we have to put so many points into the Phelan stuff for keys that it's just really locked in. We've got like 1 or 2 free points.
Ooh, speaking
So
of the
it would
trees,
benefit both.
what do you think of the monk class tree, like War Within edition?
I think I like it. I'm glad they got mostly rid of the statues.
Yeah.
I know they're still there, but they were not capstone worthy. Lighter than air is my favorite ability, and
Same.
I love it very much.
Same.
I
so
saw
good.
it in
Nice.
alpha, and I'm like, dude, this better make it in. I was so afraid it was gonna get cut.
It
But
does kind of
it's so much
feel
fun.
like an alpha ability that is going to get cut. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
I
it
was
didn't.
scared.
That's great. Yeah.
I do feel like there's like maybe too many anti-root things in there with roll charges, and we've got our own slows now, which is great because that helps with kiting. But there's like 3 anti-root things. We got Tiger's Lust. Can't remember the name of it. It's like Swift Footing or something. That's on the left side. And there's one more. But it just seemed kind of like a lot of that. And I attributed that to being PvP oriented, but I'm not sure.
Oh, you're
'Cause
talking
I
about like
think,
a roll one where like if you roll into players.
Yeah. It's like you remove a snare. Roll removes a snare once every 30 seconds or something. And the only dungeon that I've seen significant slows in is Cinderbrew Meadery. There's a lot. but like that's it.
Season 2 dungeon as well, dude. It's
Yeah.
I still think it's bad to have returning dungeons in season 1s of expansions. I wish it was just 8 new dungeons.
Yeah, at least for the first season.
Yeah, and then start rotating.
I want to see them.
Yeah, especially because we're gonna get to play them like while we're leveling, and then the first few weeks or whatever is heroics, and then just like bye, we'll see you in season 2.
Yeah, I'd be fine with like all of season 1 being the new ones,
Mm-hmm.
and then 2 and 3 being a mix, and then 4, if we're getting faded again, being the original 8. Yeah, I don't. Well, they were like, if you guys keep enjoying faded, we'll keep doing it. I'm like, who's enjoying it? We're playing it, but are we enjoying it? I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like the reaction to Faded was so much better than the reaction to Awakened. I feel like the reaction to Awakened was so
Yeah.
much more negative, like across the board. So I bet they're gonna rethink it, because Faded was received, I think, pretty positively. Like I think people were largely like, oh yeah, this is a cool experiment. This is better than nothing. But there was a cool seasonal affix that season as well for M+, which maybe was one of the things that's missing this time.
Yeah, I
think
like
better
it.
than nothing was, yeah.
I liked it specifically because it was like used as an experiment ground. If what made this season 4 sucked is we just got the same like it was literally just recycled content and nothing new was added, and I think that was the real bummer. What made Faded in season 4 great in Shadowlands was how they tried a bunch of different things. They had the Boolean system for the first time, whatever it was called, I don't remember, and
Dinars.
yeah, dinars, yeah.
Yeah.
And they gave us rotating dungeons for the first time ever. And you know, like, I just wish they did more with these Faded seasons. And I swear they're not that bad. At least, like, you know, in my opinion, I enjoy Faded specifically for that.
I don't know if this is like a this is my job type of take, but I think it'd be kind of cool if they gave us just the key vendor for season 4, like we have on beta, where we just build our own keys, give us old seasonal affixes back. You don't need to
Ooh.
give us like bursting back. You can keep that, but like the seasonal ones would be cool to revisit. They would have to, you know, for Awakened, they'd have to like put the obelisks in places, but I can't imagine that would take too long, right? For a full season. of
Yeah.
content.
I feel like that should be doable. Yeah. I miss Awakened so much. I feel like that would be such a good, like if just every Faded season had a Awakened, I'd be down. I'd be so much happier with
Yeah.
it.
It'd be cool just to revisit old stuff. Especially for, you know, we're talking about, yeah, season 4 BFA, it was so good. And there's some people that are like, damn, wish I played that. Wish I knew what they were talking about. So it'd be kind of cool to let people see things that they missed in past seasons.
Yeah.
There were
Maybe
a lot
tie
of great
some
things.
cosmetics to it.
Yeah. Like, I know a lot of this is like looking back, hindsight stuff. But man, there were a lot of great things in older versions of WoW. Like, man, remember back when there was no target capping? That's crazy to think about. Or before BFA, there was like, you know, less GCDs on certain abilities. Like a frenzied region wasn't on a global. There's definitely a lot of changes they've made to the game over these years that I'm still not a fan of. But I do want to see like how it ends up going. Because that's how I felt about these dungeons. Whenever people are asking me like, "Oh, how's the season 1 dungeons feel?" And I'm definitely a lot less doomer about them after all of the tuning changes. Like, I don't know how you guys feel about the dungeons. I know everyone's been like talking about like how terrible they are, but I think it'll just be like a different approach, and I'm curious to see how it'll end up playing.
Yeah, I'm trying to be optimistic because, especially with changing the entire affix system, there's going to be growing pains, especially
Well,
as
what
people
about like
learn
the
their new
dungeons and how they
classes.
play?
Like mechanically,
Yeah, just like overall your thoughts on like how the dungeons have played.
I am more concerned for other people than I am myself. I'm more concerned for people not in.
I feel that way about
groups with
tank
people they
changes
like.
too. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm worried that it's going to be more annoying and difficult to live, and that's going to make less people play tank. But I'm not too worried about like my ability to live in whatever
Yeah.
keys I do.
So I guess I'm worried for the general population, but I think that like pushers will make it work like they always do.
Yeah. I don't know. I kind of agree with you. Like, I love what they've done with affixes idea so much that I'm trying to go into the season optimistic, but I'm definitely hopeful that if we don't like, say, the stop change and the like move towards all the mobs having so much like unstoppable and lieutenant mobs in these pulls and stuff. Like hopefully they are willing to be wrong about that one without reverting the whole thing back to affixes as well and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
My biggest gripe with these dungeons is just how samey it feels. Like, man, I just wish you can play these dungeons more differently. Whether it be like
You want
how
them
you pull the
to-
dungeon, yeah, or like how you route around the dungeon. It's just like a bunch of small things, but it feels like anytime you try to pull more than one pack at a time, you instantly explode.
I do feel like even I didn't push as hard as I did in BFA as I do now, but it feels like BFA was kind of maybe not the golden age, but it was a very good era in Mythic Plus because there were some dungeons that were pretty linear, but then you had things like Freehold that was just wide open. So I feel like a lot of the dungeons also comes down to how they're actually physically laid out instead of just, the mob mechanics. Because you have Grim Batol and that's pretty straight. But then you have other ones that are more open. I wish that they would open up the maze in Mist because everyone hates the maze. It's such a pain and such a time issue. But it's also it's just slow and restrictive. So I wish that they would open things up more and let us kind of go crazier.
Yeah, the maze. I don't know. The maze was always the part of Mists that I feel like that's the part of Mists that the high key people like. You either hated it or you liked it because you were abusing pulling through the walls and stuff,
Yeah.
right? Like, there's nobody was in there like,
don't know if
yeah,
anyone
I
liked
like
it.
doing this the right way. Well, I feel like there's like there's some buy-in from the more casual players of doing the maze, as intended. And doing
I'm
the
actually
puzzle and
curious
stuff.
about that too, because I actually remember having this question with my chat. I'm like, man, is there anyone who actually enjoys doing the maze in M plus? Like, I understand it, like it's actually kind of cool to like have that whole figuring it out when you're just like doing it for the first time, or if you're doing it in like M zeros or whatever maybe. But I swear in M plus, is there like anyone who actually enjoys the maze?
No, healer job. You're just AFK
Yeah,
running around
healer job.
stumps.
It's like, yeah, it's like you're fighting a pack, and after you kill the pack, then everyone just like sits there waiting. And it's just like the healer just like eventually figures it out.
Or what was it, the Chinese spyware meme about the helper?
Oh yeah, there are some crazy ones now.
That's how I feel about Dark Flame Cleft too. There's like the escort the cart through the darkness.
Oh, that
I think it's
one.
cool,
Oh,
but I think it's gonna suck in a key. But it's cool
It's
in
gonna
M
suck.
Zero.
Yeah, I feel that way about like cool ways of having travel instead of graveyards as well, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, you can take this minecart to get back or whatever if you die or something like that, or this
Yeah.
this bat will fly you there from the start of the dungeon. It's like, yeah, that's cool, but like not at M plus. I don't know, at M plus I just want to be able to hit release spirit and be at the last boss room I killed and just know that that's how it's gonna work and not sit there watching some RP knowing that my timer is trickling away.
Yeah. I do wish that they would separate key layouts more, like further away from the M Zero version. Like we had halls. It was like 2 minutes of roleplay or
100%.
something ridiculous. But then they cut it down a bit. But I do wish that roleplay was just taken out for time content. So they don't have to keep readjusting the timer as they're like, oh yeah, this is actually a big time sink. Sitting here for 40 seconds, go figure. But I wish that they would kind of treat Mythic Plus more as their own thing instead of just dungeons with a timer now.
Yeah, I think they've moved a little bit in that direction. Like they did some good stuff in halls with cutting out a bunch of RP near the start of that season. But I do agree with you that like I wish they would full commit to doing that rather than like band-aiding the worst offenders each season.
Yeah, because then you have Miss, you have the maze, but then you also have After Miss Caller where she just sits there and
Oh
talks.
yeah, I remember
Really
during
cool.
that expansion, people would like go out and around to the left and then like slow
Yep.
fall down because it was faster. Yeah.
Oh yeah, on that little branch, huh?
Yeah. I wonder if that'll be the meta again.
I do wonder if they're gonna take more active approaches to changing how M plus plays compared to like normal for at least like the plus 12 experience. Because I mean, clearly they've acknowledged that like there's a different way of playing M plus, I mean, which is like the plus 12 range and onwards, and if you're doing below plus 12s, That's like where they sort of hard set their line. So I'm wondering if they will just like actually make changes towards
Oh,
how the
that would
game
be
plays in
cool.
like a
Yeah, if like the maze just turned off in 12 key, or like
yeah, yeah,
if there was
yeah,
like a fixed maze in 12 or higher keys or something. Like,
I like that.
yeah. Like they can make all sorts of these types of changes.
oh yeah, imagine if it was just like you can open any door, like the first door you walk into opens, and the like pedestals or whatever the mini game is gone, but you still pick your route through the maze.
I could get behind that.
Yeah. Okay, we do have a Patreon question this week from Jack Heal Me that says, do y'all think it's a mistake Blizzard haven't made more support roles lined up for War Within release? I personally think Blizzard not announcing more support classes with the release of War Within makes me doubt the existence of the support role in WoW. I don't want support role to be deleted, but the dev team need to double down on the existence of the support role or brush it under the carpet and move on. Mage support, shaman support, priest support, paladin support, so much potential to add more, and double down on the support role in the game. Even make dungeons 6 players and keep 3 DPS. Why not? That's a yeah. I mean, we talked a little bit at the start of this about like the trifecta, right, of the 3 different roles, and then obviously Og has kind of taken a spot in there. I don't know, Meg, how do you feel about the Og support situation in general, and then this specific question? Do you think they should add more support specs?
I have a couple takes when it comes to this. So I don't think that support roles are necessarily a bad thing, but I do wish, if I could turn the clock back, that they never introduce Og and they just turn healers into supports, and all the pure healers can be like, no, I don't want more responsibility. I don't care. I think that healers
I don't
were
care.
more
Holy.
set up for.
So based, oh my god.
I think healers were more
like
set
that.
up to be supports with where they were before when Og was introduced. So that's like my main thing. But now I do think that you either love Og or you hate Og, or in a lot of high Mythic Plus groups cases, both. You love what it does for you, but you hate that it is a cemented spot in your 5-man group because it's one slot that you always have. Does it bring a lust? Great, takes care of that. But it's always there. And people are going to hate whenever something has a permanent spot.
Yeah. Yeah, my take on making it a full role is like right now the support role only exists because the Og spec is just broken, right? Like it's 120%, 130% the value of a regular DPS, something like that. But you can only have one of them because of the way that it works, right? So like if we like that, then and we make it a full role, that means we would need 1 out of every 3 DPS players to be excited to play a support, right? Which I don't think they are. Like I don't think there's that much buy-in. Maybe it's somewhere
Absolutely
close.
not.
Maybe if we went to
There's a
those
few
6-player
unicorns.
dungeons and it was then it goes to 1 out of every 4 DPS would need to swap to make it work number-wise, and that's maybe a little bit more plausible, but I still think that it's just I don't know. I think that the like Blizzard they said that they don't want it to be like that, right? Like they've said that they want Og to be interchangeable, right? They want it to be not 130% the value of a DPS. They want it to be 100% the value of a DPS, right? Like something where you're neither excited nor where you, I mean, I guess you neither need nor can't play an Og, right? It's just like 1 DPS option equal to bringing a Warlock or a Rogue or whatever, right? Like anything like that. Which, yeah, the fact that they haven't landed on that target yet for high keys is something that has caused all high key players to continuously complain ever since the spec's been introduced. But
Yeah. When
Yeah.
they said it was
I mean, it's
such a
just not impossible.
success,
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think that if it was a success, we would have more of them. And I think that would alleviate some of the Og hatred if there was more than one option. So we've kind of opened that box already. Like, okay, now there's one. What do you do? Delete it or add more?
yeah. I do agree though that like if healers just did damage through buffing their group instead of like through doing actual damage, that would maybe also lead to like a harmonious, place where the pure healers are happy with as well as the healers that like doing damage, right? Like there's kind of a compromise between those two camps.
Yeah, it could have been so good.
That's a cool
That's
take.
basically how supports play in Lost Ark. They're essentially healers that heal sometimes, or for the most part, they're just shielding players, and they're just buffing everyone's damage. And they're also like basically mandatory because they buff so much damage that it's like Og, right? You want at least one of them, but having more than one of them isn't good. I will
Yeah, some of the
say
skills.
I I am personally an AUG enjoyer. I enjoy supports. I think supports are like how games should be played nowadays. And I know I've said that since like the beginning, and I know a lot of people will like absolutely hate AUG. But I think a lot of the hate for AUG really comes from the DPS who are like, oh, they're taking our jobs.
Right.
They're not happy with
Well, it's, yeah, you've
these
gone from
filthy
having
AUG
three
players that
spots to
just
two if,
right,
in any
right.
key if you're not willing to play AUG yourself, or you're like feeling obligated to swap to it, which is also not a good feeling.
Right, and I feel like the best approach is to somehow make lover roles more appealing. Because I mean, right now we just live in a world of DPS where like there are so many DPS out there and not enough tanks and healers. And I wish they just made the roles more appealing. Like for me, I've always said that tanks and healers are the most fun when they're OP as hell. I don't know if
Hmm.
you guys feel this way, but I swear, like at
I do,
least
yeah.
from my POV, like it's super fun when tanks and healers are like super OP. I'm thinking back like end of Legion, end of BFA, when you just do like crazy amounts of healing. Tanks are like giga tanky, and you don't have to like worry about dying left and right, and you can kind of just go crazy, right? And that's also when I felt like there were the most amount of healers and tanks playing. But nowadays, it feels like they're trying to like constantly challenge healers and tanks, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Like I think it is still fine, but it definitely lowers the participation in these roles, and it's a lot more about the dedicated healers and the dedicated tanks that want to be signing up for that job.
Yeah, because then you get DPS players that experiment with tanking or experiment with healing, and then the healers get a break and get to play DPS or whatever, and it's just more fun because people are having more fun when they play.
Yeah, and also you get the spot where it's like if you're not that great at it, right? Like when you nerf tanks and healers, but I'm talking about my experience is mostly on the tank side of this recently. Like when you nerf tanks, being a good tank is now like I lived that pull, right?
Hmm.
And then like the bad tanks are just dying on that pull and getting blamed and getting flamed and going home, right? Whereas when tanks are OP, it's like, oh, the good tank is doing a lot of damage, right? Or like they're pulling multiple packs, and the bad tank is still able to do the key, right? Like you're still able to survive. It's just you're not doing all that extra stuff. And I feel like that's a so much healthier place for tanks and healers to be is where like if you're mediocre, you're still living, right? You're still able to complete your job. You're just not able to go above and beyond, right? Whereas right now it feels like War Within is setting it up where like to just survive is 90th percentile gameplay or something.
Right,
Yeah, and
there's
that
like so
puts so
much
much
more
more
skill
pressure.
expression.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like I know it's a common thing. Like everyone's just gonna be like, oh, just get good, right? But there's only so much getting good because we're looking at healers and tanks, and there are not a lot of players playing those two roles. And just telling them to get good is like more like just like quit and go play DPS instead.
Yeah, I started playing Windwalker a bit, and it's fun. Like I did 2 weeks of keys at the end of season 4, and the key deplete. I don't care. I'm just here to push DPS buttons. I had fun. It's like I was pugging like 16, 17s, and it was fine when they depleted because it was still fun. But depleting stuff as a healer feels terrible. Depleting stuff as a tank feels terrible
Oh
because
yeah,
Yeah.
you're just like, damn, I messed up, and the DPS are
Yeah.
like, I don't care. I push DPS buttons.
Yeah. Yeah, it depends on
yeah,
how you're depleting, right? Like if it's
Yeah.
like if you're running it down is one thing, but if it's just like oh, close key, whatever, all good. Then, but if you're the
You're
tank and
like,
the healer, yeah, you're just punching yourself. You're like, man,
yeah. A
especially if
lot
you're
of
the
people just
tank,
want to
right?
vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of
yeah.
people just want to have a good time. Like I've noticed that too, because so Frosty Gate has been kind of popping off recently, right? Like it's been
Mhm.
doing really well, and I've been hearing a lot of people saying like, "Man, Frosty Gate is so fun. I love how it plays right now." But I'm like, bro, it's just hitting two buttons. But and like, but I mean, like that's the gameplay people want, right? Like when you look at the most popular specs in the game, it's like, wow, okay, it's BM Hunter. You just hit two buttons. You play Red Paladin, great. You're just like mashing your head in the keyboard and it's having a good time. Fury Warrior, Bear Tank, Prot Warrior, like these are all really fun to play because like sometimes people just want to chill out and have a good time and just do big damage.
All right, this seems like a kind of a we've covered all the stuff that I was thinking there was to talk about. Meg, is there you have any topics you'd like to soapbox about or anything like that? Otherwise, we could depart.
I think I had my soapbox earlier with
Nice.
the melee range thing.
That's good.
Oh, actually, yeah. Speaking
Oh
of which, like,
wait,
how do you feel
yeah.
about being what? Okay, go ahead.
Or you can say how I feel about being melee.
Yeah, specifically
Dude,
in Warfin.
it sucks. I hate
Okay,
it.
yeah.
Like, I like being a Mistweaver, but being in melee, I am just punished 24/7. And then I look back and I see my mage like jumping up and down, just not doing anything. I'm like, dude, aren't
I
you fighting
mean,
for your life?
playing with other melees too. Like when there
Yeah.
are like 5 melees in the group, it's like so claustrophobic, and it's like, oh my God, I just want to be
Yeah.
the only one in melee. And
It's
but now there's
crazy.
like, it's they need to make it less bad. It's a problem.
I
I was
dude,
thinking about that earlier.
it feels like if you're playing, yeah, like even if you play like the one melee that's not your tank, it's already bad. Two, it's like, oh man, it's so crowded in here. And whereas the range don't have that problem at all, right? Like if your group is one tank and four ranged, it's so cozy. Yeah, that is a
I
huge
wish
problem.
I wish it was split more evenly between keys and raid. Like you get melee players complaining, you're like, yeah, this sucks. I'm always in danger, and then range people are like, I have to do mechanics in raid. Okay, great.
Yeah.
It should be even between the two, right? Like I shouldn't be fighting for my life in keys, and you shouldn't be fighting for your life in raid. We should each have, it's not going to be equal every single fight, but it should be split
Yeah, exactly.
somehow.
Like it shouldn't just always be, oh, ranged have it easy in keys, melee have it easy in raid. Like
Yeah.
it should be like, oh yeah, this fight's kind of hard for melee, or like, oh, this dungeon's got some nasty range mechanics or whatever like that. But like
Yeah.
on average, it's you're playing the game in a very similar way in both spots. Yeah.
I feel like they don't know how to make range mechanics in keys that aren't also melee mechanics.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I
Yeah,
do either.
because they have like the expel, like the mist maze is a good example of this, right? You have the big blue circles that just grief melee, right? And then you have the like charge and hit you for a bunch of damage and knock you back thing, which is like ostensibly a range mechanic, right? But like, I don't know, it feels like a very different kind of thing because the big blue circle affects all the melee. The charge only happens to like one person, you can see it coming, and like
Yeah.
you don't lose as much uptime on it because you can play around it. I don't know.
It's also
And-
so lethal.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you make one mistake, you're dead. If the range gets hit by a swirly, they're probably dead. Maybe.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer is to that problem as well, but I definitely agree that these dungeons are like over-indexed on melee mechanics.
Well, and then you have the issue like with Brackenhide where they just stand on a pole.
Yeah.
Knockhood. You just stand on a pole and then you don't do anything. And I'm down here with 6 bleed stacks. Like, what am I supposed to do? That's something that I don't know if it's true or if it's just like recency bias. But if you have a full ranged group, melee mechanics don't happen or they go on the tank. But if you have a full melee group, you're still getting the range mechanics. It's just picking someone randomly. Right? Like, it's still happening. It just isn't picking your mage every time because he's not the only one or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't
Yeah.
know if that's true or if it's just the most recent set of dungeons, but I was thinking about that. I'm like, dude, just don't bring melee and there's half the amount of mechanics or your tank just
No,
eats
yeah,
it. Like
these
the
dungeons
bites.
yeah, these dungeons in particular are much rougher.
Sucks. Brackenhide makes me want to pull my hair out. Even as Windwalker, like not even healing it, just being in melee is just demonic.
All right, good soapbox.
Yeah.
What are
Sorry.
your like content plans, by the way, for War Within? Do you have any cool projects you're working on or anything, or just more Mistweaver guide kind of content?
It depends on how much fun I'm having, to be
Good
honest.
answer.
I'm gonna do Mistweaver for sure. I would like to do Windwalker. I've been having a lot of fun with that. I've been playing it in Raid a little bit too. Brewmaster's kind of on the list if it stays good. But I've never done like my goal would be to title as Mistweaver and as Windwalker, like be in range on both. But Windwalker would be mostly pugging, so I don't know if that's gonna happen, but it'd be kind of cool. I also leveled a Warlock on Remix and a Blood DK on Remix, so those are kind of like also options, but I would like to keep it all on one character because I don't really like gearing multiple characters.
Oh yeah, holy moly, gearing
Yeah.
multiple characters. That's the worst.
Yeah.
I mean, I know a lot of people like gearing alts, but goddamn it, man, it's gonna be rough and Warfin for me at least.
Yeah. I feel like as a DPS, like as a healer, you can kind of heal over your gear level. Like you can kind of skill out of it. But
Yeah,
with
you can get
DPS,
by.
I don't think I
Yeah, there's
can.
no way. If you're like, 40 eye levels below or whatever, it's just
Yeah.
it's a catastrophe. Yeah.
Well, and
Yeah, I
just
mean,
like
you just
not
get like
knowing what
straight
you're
up.
doing too.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like even if you knew what you're doing, right? Like you're just straight up gonna get number diffed because like
Yeah.
there's just like a number difference in the gear and nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, I was
Did
playing
you guys
Windwalker
watch?
in Raid. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead. I was gonna derail a bit.
I was playing Windwalker in Raid like when I first picked it up, and the stats between Mistweaver and Windwalker are like completely flopped. Windwalker loves Mastery, Mistweaver hates it, at least in Dragonflight. And I had finally gotten all my gear, and I was comparing myself to the other Windwalker in our raid, and I'm doing like 30% less damage than them. I'm like, my gear's not that bad. I'm pushing the same buttons. I'm even critting more. Like, why am I so far behind? And I look, and they had 30% more mastery than me, and that's like
Yeah.
literally 30% damage. I was like, oh, okay, sick. Like, I just didn't know how to approach not healing because you can usually just push your buttons better. I
Yeah.
was like, oh, I'm pushing the same ones and just not doing as much.
All right, Dorki, what was your derail?
Oh yes, I was gonna ask. Did you guys watch the new cinematic? How do you guys feel about it compared to the one before?
I haven't yet. Actually, I don't know if I should admit that, but I saw it that
What the
I've been
hell?
meaning to watch it. I haven't.
Don't you get it when you log in?
Yeah, but I escaped out of it.
Escape.
I logged in to raid because we had to get some Byrack mounts. So log
I
in
thought it
2
was
minutes till
cool.
raid. Yeah, I plan to watch it. I've heard good things. I've seen people tweeting about it. So, and I'm supposed to be I watched all the cinematics. I just haven't yet.
I thought it was weird that they gave the spider a nose like in the second half. I don't really know where that came
Yeah,
from,
everyone's talking
but
about
I think
that.
it's cool. It kind of reminds me of, uh, was it Garrosh and the Shaw? It's like it feels very similar to that, where it's like this evil thing in your ear telling you what to
Oh,
do and betraying
yeah, I see what you're saying.
your whoever.
To be honest, that's kind of just like what WoW's been doing forever.
Yeah.
Like I'm just thinking, like, didn't something similar happen to Ajara, and that's like basically what happened to Arthas, and
Ajara's, I think, was she made a deal with Nazoth to save the people, to save the High Elves, but then he's like,
yeah,
all right, you're a fish now. And that kind of backfired.
yeah. It's always like a story of like there's this character that is like making a deal with someone evil, and
Hmm.
bad stuff happens. Who would have known?
Are you
But
tired of the, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
I was gonna ask if you're tired of, like, the world-ending evil every expansion. Like, it's always
Yeah, I
the
mean,
apocalypse situation.
I think they tried the opposite sort of with like the beginning of Dragonflight.
Yeah,
Like
it's
we
like
sort of
lower
got that
stakes a
vibe,
little
and then
bit. Yeah.
yeah, and then it just didn't really hit with the
Hmm.
players. So I'm assuming they're like trying to go back to the whole like our big bad evil. That's my impression. I don't actually know.
I'd agree. I think people maybe didn't resonate with the characters as much because we didn't really know them. Like, you had some mentioned if you're into the lore, but if you had only played WoW, which is, I think, most people, if you only played the game, then you're like, who are these people? Who are these dragons?
Oh, 100%. I had no idea what the hell was happening all of Dragonflight.
Yeah.
Like usually I have like roughly an idea of like what's going on in the lore, but this time I had no idea what's going on. That's
Yeah.
the one thing I like about the cinematic they released, because the first cinematic they had with Dwarf and the Troll and the one lady. I don't even know who the hell they are, honestly, but
That one lady.
I the lady with the arbor.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
armor. Yeah.
yeah. You know what I'm
Yeah.
talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
with the
and I'm just like,
prosthetic.
oh wait,
Oh,
it's
Theron Lothar.
yeah,
Yeah, with the shield on arm.
yeah, it's
I think
Lilfar.
that's
Yeah.
sick.
Yeah, that is such a sick
Yeah,
aesthetic.
it was cool as hell, and I just had like no idea what the hell was happening this entire time. But like at least with this cinematic, it kind of like gives me a little bit of a backstory. So now it's like, oh, okay, so there's a big bad spider lady, and now we know what's going on. And there's Zaltaf.
Yeah.
It does feel like it got a little cosmic. I feel like maybe after Cataclysm, or maybe that's just when I stopped paying attention. But that's the last time I felt like I know these characters, I know what's happening, I understand, who's supposed to be evil and who's not. But then after that, it's like, it could go either way. Or you recognize like a last name.
Yeah,
I know
Lothar.
Lothar.
Yeah,
I know that
Lothar.
one.
Yeah, that's the only thing I recognize.
Yeah. Yeah, it does seem like WoW's kind of exhausted its stable of like characters from Warcraft 3 that everybody remembers, right? Like, especially the villains, right? We've fought all of the villains from there, some of them twice, so I don't know. They've got Thrall and Anduin, I guess, in this expansion, but it's it doesn't really feel like a Thrall and Anduin expansion in the way that like Legion felt like an Illidan expansion, right? And like, ICC or Wrath felt like obviously the Lich King expansion, right?
Yeah, because you had these really iconic villains that were cool and had a backstory that wasn't just I'm evil, haha.
Yeah.
And now we're just making stuff up now, which is fine because it would have happened eventually. But
yeah,
it's a little weird.
I think it's fine. Like I don't know. I think that they've made some really good villains as well. Like Eridikron was sick, is sick still. Yeah. He's coming. He's not gone, right? Like it's just it is tough to like get people invested in them when they're not already, especially in a game like WoW where so much of the storytelling gets missed by so much of the player base, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's stuff that I am learning still, even about old content that I really should know.
Yeah.
So it's a very lore-rich game, but I do feel like a lot of it comes from Warcraft 1, 2, and 3, or the books, which most people aren't going to participate in.
Has there ever been any series? Oh, dude,
no,
same.
They need to do movies. They need to do like an
WoW
animated series, like Arcane.
Oh,
exactly.
God. Yeah. Although if they did Arcane, the amount of times that there's a character from whatever show that shows up in game, and my stupid guild is gonna be like, oh, that's the character, because we do whatever played League or whatever.
Yeah,
that Jace from Arcane.
Well, that's the thing. I've watched it. I never played League. I never will. But it was a good show.
Good choice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do not ever do that.
It is crazy, though. I am really impressed by Arcane. Like, the fact that they were able to come up with this good of a backstory for all these characters that all the players have known for the longest time. It's like, when have they ever really... When has there ever been another time where like they were able to create a story behind characters that were already in a game? Like, this never really happened before, right?
Yeah, I think Arcane did it. I mean, if it wasn't the first time, I'm sure it's definitely the best time that it's been done, right? Like, to the highest standard.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would be so happy if there was like a WoW cinematic universe.
They could even use such old, like, they could do a really good one with Darrowshire, that Eastern Plaguelands questline with the Red Pass. Like, that would be a really good short series. That was a good storyline.
So I feel like so many of the like Cataclysm zones could have one. Like so many of the Cataclysm zones had such good self-contained storylines in them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Alas.
even like the Gilneas stuff, like the war. I've been redoing like my lore master and stuff for appearances, and I got through Darkshire and the Plaguelands recently, so those are fresh in my mind. But even not reading the text and just going through the quest lines, like the Worgen were really cool. Because we went from, killing them because they're evil to having them as a playable race. And it was kind of a cool dynamic to watch, even as someone that's not, like, really into the lore.
All right, I now believe we've exhausted all the things that I planned to talk to and a bunch of other stuff that I hadn't planned to talk about, but it was interesting to go into. Meg, where can people find your, like, content and stuff?
I am Megasett on pretty much every platform: Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, but that one is whatever. But mostly Twitch, mostly YouTube and Twitter.
Awesome. Yeah, Frank will put all those links down below. He loves doing that. And thank you so much for coming on the PoddyC.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
It was always fun. Always a pleasure.
Adios.
Podios.
Where the hell's Max?
He's never
mentioned him.
His hockey game. No, okay, so I realized I hadn't mentioned that Max wasn't here at the start, so what I'm gonna do is I'll record an intro bit to
If we could just like cut this part of it just like real quick. talk about backs, just like bring them up.
Okay, now if I know Frank, what he's going to do is he's just going to leave this at the end, and because he loves just doing that, like just leaving after the podios, he loves leaving in that, and then he'll put a pre-recorded thing at the front. But we'll see. He could do it your way, yeah.